Timothy was sure that the world hated him. The streets of the cozy mountain town were filled with people going about their business. When people saw their friends, they would greet them, ask how they were doing, and a small conversation would start between the interlocutors. A girl was running down the street, trying to catch up with her mother. Her mother turned around and asked her not to run, afraid that she might fall. But all the conversations immediately disappeared when Timothy walked by. The women hugged their children close and the adults moved some distance away. Now, all the passers-by tried not to look at the guy in the torn cloak carrying the sack. Timothy heard everyone around him whispering about how he was the corpse collector. The guy did not react to the voices around him or the people staring at him. His path was straight to one of the shops. The shop owner was not alone and immediately asked why the corpse collector had come to visit him this time. The other customers were in a hurry to leave the shop because they didn't want to be in the same room with him, but Timothy wanted to sell something. He poured the collected jewelry out of the bag onto the table. The store owner was unhappy, calling the finds garbage. The man threw a few bronze coins on the table with contempt and said that Timothy had had enough. He had to leave, but the guy was amazed at the price. He was offered only 20% of the regular value, and he wondered why. The store owner was not going to answer him. Instead, he grew outraged, saying that the corpse collector had no right to say anything. In this world, danger lurked at every turn. People could face monsters at any moment. However, there were also those who hunted these monsters. Such people were called adventurers. High-ranked adventurers mined expensive materials and fought monsters every day to level up. A slight difference in levels made a huge difference in power. Level was the foundation of this world. And it was in this cruel world that Timothy's adventurer level was 1. After the boy received his reward at the store, he headed to the market and asked an old man he knew for bread, as he always did. The old man greeted him and handed Timothy a package, saying he had prepared some bread he couldn't sell. This was not the first time this happened, but it was a sin for the boy to complain. He paid for the goods offered. His grandfather said that maybe he should find another vocation and quit his job as an adventurer, but Timothy replied that he couldn't do that. He had already gained a reputation as a notorious corpse collector. No one would agree to hire him. He had long wanted to become an adventurer, but after his dream came true, he learned about his curse. 0 experience. He turned out to have a rather unusual skill, or rather a real curse that was impossible to fight. No matter how hard he tried, he failed to gain experience. His level didn't rise. It seemed like Timothy couldn't get any stronger thanks to this cursed skill. But he didn't give up. The boy believed with all his heart that he would one day be able to improve his level, but the system was relentless. After a while, the boy finally lost faith in his abilities. Then he started collecting materials from the corpses of monsters. He had nothing to do with killing the beasts. They were killed by adventurers, and that's how Timothy became a corpse collector. The materials from first-level monsters were very cheap, and the guy needed to look for better monsters. Collecting small things in the wake of the adventurers, Timothy knew he couldn't last long. While thinking about this, he didn't notice that he had crossed the path of a group of young people. He lost his balance. Timothy couldn't hold on to anything, and he dropped a piece of bread, his last meal, and fell to the ground. The leader of the adventurers stepped on the bread and said with disdain that the bastard was a corpse collector. The adventurers crowded around the leader and Timothy with arrogant smiles. Everyone in this town knew him by that repulsive nickname. Because of it, he couldn't find another job. He couldn't understand why this was happening to him. But no matter how much he was despised, he couldn't stop searching the corpses. Otherwise, he would simply die of hunger. Moving through the goblin's cave, the boy hoped that he could find something worthwhile here. Suddenly, Timothy smelled a strong, unpleasant odor and saw a giant dragon corpse that had already begun to decompose. As he got closer, he realized that this monster was about level 200. But now was not the time to think about it. He had to gather materials. Timothy would probably be able to make good money. The boy examined the body and realized that many expensive parts were already gone. He was left with a putrid sack, an organ that, in the case of monsters of this category, was usually avoided because of the very strong, unpleasant odor inside. But Timothy didn't care. He made his living digging through corpses. When he cut open the bag, he realized there was something inside. The guy made a bigger incision and, to his surprise, found armor inside. As soon as the armor was freed from the tissues of the dragon's corpse, The cave was suddenly filled with red lightning. The guy realized that something bad was coming, something he wouldn't be able to cope with. A voice in his head ordered him to put on the armor. Timothy realized that the voice was coming from the armor itself, which meant the object was dangerous and he needed to get away as quickly as possible. But as the boy was heading for the exit of the cave, he suddenly saw a bunch of goblins preparing to attack. Timothy couldn't figure out where they had come from. It turned out the corpse collector had been rather inattentive. While preparing for the fight, he realized that his opponents were of the same level as him, but he didn't have good equipment. The goblins, meanwhile, rushed to attack, some of them armed, and Timothy realized he was about to be killed. The corpse collector could not believe he would really die in such a place, having achieved nothing in life. The guy didn't understand how, but he was pushed back toward the armor, and the voice started to sound in his head again. The voice insisted he put it on. Timothy decided that, in any case, he was not going to live, so he had nothing to lose. He shouted that he was willing to put on the armor, which in his mind was better than being killed by goblins. The system confirmed the wearer's consent and activated quick dressing. Surprised, Timothy looked back in the direction of the armor, which began to emit lightning toward him. A few seconds later, in front of the astonished goblins, the guy was fully equipped in the armor of the abyss, ready to fight. Timothy, looking at his new armor, wondered if the armor of the abyss was truly on his side. The armor replied that it would unconditionally follow the boy's orders. The boy, preparing to repel the goblin's attack, believed, unlike his old sword, which had been knocked out of his hands, the blade he held now was much better. The guy realized that the goblins were of the same level as him, but with this blade, the corpse collector had a chance to survive. After slashing a couple of enemies, the guy suddenly felt a surge of energy in his armor. He didn't understand what was happening. Timothy felt that with each kill, his body became much lighter. He became stronger, as if it were not his body at all. Finally, believing that he could survive and win, the guy shouted that all his enemies would now come to an end. After the fight ended, a strange light from the corpses of the enemies began to penetrate Timothy's armor. The guy didn't realize what was happening until the system announced that his level had increased. Surprised, Timothy looked at the message in front of his eyes and could not believe what he was seeing. The system notified him that the owner's level had been confirmed and had now increased to level 6. Timothy didn't know how to feel about this news. He had already grown used to not being able to gain experience points. He looked around at the remains of the monsters that surrounded him, wondering what this meant. At that moment, the system notified him that thanks to the armor of the abyss, he was able to use the level absorption skill. It turned out that Timothy could really raise his level without gaining experience. In fact, this strange armor allowed him to absorb the levels of his enemies. He wasn't imagining things. He was actually getting stronger and faster all this time. By now, Timothy had already gained 5 levels in addition to his first. He could really become stronger. The guy was overwhelmed with joy. This incredible news was a blessing. His dream was coming true. The smell in the cave was awful, but it didn't matter. Thanks to this dragon, Timothy had been able to level up. Suddenly, the boy realized that if he overcame all the enemies in this cave, he could become even stronger. Putting his hands to his chest, Timothy thought it was likely that his enemies wouldn't be able to hurt him thanks to this armor. If he used all the advantages of this equipment to its fullest potential and killed all the goblins, he could easily achieve his goal. But the guy's thoughts were interrupted by a strange feeling of someone's presence. He didn't even realize there was an enemy behind him. Looking around, he saw a giant goblin, but he knew that there shouldn't be any strong monsters in this cave. Still, the boy's eyes couldn't deceive him. He was looking at the Goblin Lord himself, surrounded by his subordinate minions. Timothy did not understand how the highest-ranking goblin of level 35, the defender of this cave, could have come here. The boy realized that he urgently needed to run to the exit of the cave, but behind him, smaller goblins had already begun to eat the dragon's corpse. The guy realized the goblins were attracted by the smell of meat. The system alert recommended retreat immediately. Timothy understood this perfectly well, but he was unable to do so. All the exits were blocked. The Goblin Lord struck his first blow. The guy had to accept the fight. He tried to hold back the heavy onslaught of the enemy with both hands, but the resistance was useless. The Goblin Lord was extremely strong and easily threw the boy deep into the cave. It was difficult for Timothy to get up. He struggled to get to his feet, but he had no choice. The enemy had terrible and lightning-fast force. Although he had managed to raise his level, he was still too weak, and tears flowed from his helplessness. Timothy decided to take the opportunity to escape. He was still unlucky, but he managed to get away. The whole time he was running toward the exit of the cave, but it was carefully guarded by the army of the Goblin Lord. He thought he was still too weak and considered waiting in a safe place until they left. But one of the goblins was already flying at him with an attack. It was then that the boy realized the goblin was only level 1. The guy grabbed his opponent by the head and slammed him into the ceiling. The level 1 goblin had no chance against him. After destroying the enemy, Timothy realized that in this world, everything was decided by level. Even this useless goblin must understand the difference between them, just as the boy understood the difference between himself and the Goblin Lord. The system notified him that the level was absorbed, and the owner's current level rose to 7. If Timothy continued to absorb levels, he would be able to defeat the boss. Now, he was forced to kill to survive. A fierce fight broke out, and the level 1 goblins were destroyed one by one, unable to resist the boy's strength. A few minutes later, it was all over. Only the strongest remained in this world. Heading deeper into the cave, the boy reasoned that only those with a high level of skill would be able to survive. The weak would always obey the strong, and the boy knew this from his own experience. Having destroyed the level 1 goblins, Timothy absorbed their powers and was promoted to level 15. Suddenly, after walking a bit further, the guy saw illuminated side caves and the system recommended exploring them. Following the recommendation, in a few minutes Timothy found mountains of treasure hidden in the dungeon. Stunned, the boy wandered among the piles of gold and realized the goblins had stolen all these treasures from people. Ordinary people would not have been able to handle even the level 1 goblins, so perhaps there was something useful here for Timothy. After walking a little further, the boy found a box and wondered what was inside. When he opened it, the system informed him that it was probably a recovery potion. When he took out one of the vials, he was convinced it was true and decided to use it in battle. As soon as he thought about it, the system notified him that his armor had a special place to store potions. In a second, all the vials were automatically stored on the guy's belt. This discovery turned out to be very useful for Timothy, and he thanked the higher power that brought him here. The guy really wanted to take at least some gold with him, but he realized it would hinder him in the battle with the boss. The main goal was to return to the city alive. If he succeeded, Timothy could get rich by selling materials from the monsters. Having finally gathered his thoughts, he decided not to waste any more time and set off to meet new adventures and challenges. Suddenly, when he was almost out of the cave, he heard someone's voice and went to follow the sound. Behind one of the boxes, the boy was shocked to see a girl tied up. She was the one begging for help, so the goblins were stealing children as well. The girl, seeing a person for the first time in a long time, began to cry, continuing to beg for help. Timothy hurried to untie her, noting that she was very lucky to be noticed by him. After untying the gag from her mouth, the girl introduced herself as Lindsay and said she was from a nearby village. Sincerely thanking him for saving her, the girl folded her arms over her chest, stammered, and asked the name of her savior. When Timothy said his name, Lindsay was shocked. He asked her if she knew the nickname Corpse Collector. The girl apologized barely audibly, saying that she had certainly heard all sorts of gossip about the boy, and although the rumors weren't positive at all, the guy was completely different from what she had heard. Lindsay came closer to him, looked him in the eye, and said he was different because he saved her life. In her opinion, the guy didn't look like a corpse collector at all. These words struck him to the heart. Without giving Timothy a chance to recover, the girl shouted in admiration that the guy was a hero to her. Timothy had always dreamed of becoming an adventurer who saves people from danger, and finally, he had this opportunity. The boy told the girl to get up and go with him. He promised to take her to the village. Lindsay didn't immediately understand what he said, but at that moment, even if just a little bit, the guy was happy. Someone needed him. A few minutes later, he turned to Lindsay and asked her to hide behind a rock for a while. Thanks to his amazing armor, Timothy could feel the goblins approaching. A few seconds later, he was convinced that there were more than just a few of them. They had also seen their target. By eye, Timothy was able to estimate that there were about 20 opponents, all of whom were level 1. Compared to his level 15, he said that his opponents had better get ready because very soon they would be at his level. A fight broke out again between them. The battle between the boy and the group of level 1 goblins was quite bloody. Timothy's level increased systematically, in direct proportion to the destruction of his enemies. Thanks to level absorption, the guy could attack faster and faster. He was getting stronger every second. 4 goblins rushed at the boy from behind while he was dealing with the others. They tried to take him by surprise, but for Timothy, his opponents were very slow. Before they even reached the ground, he jumped into the air, and a second later he came at them from above like an avalanche, destroying them one by one. They had nothing to counter him. Soon, only he and a few enemies were left in the tunnel. The system confirmed the owner's level. It took a few seconds to count the number of enemies he had destroyed, and eventually, the system reported that he had reached level 35. Lindsay came out of a side tunnel and asked if she could come out now, but Timothy told her to stay in the hiding place. The boy had shed a lot of the Goblin Lord's relatives' blood and had finally made his way here. The Goblin Lord was very angry and radiated powerful energy. He raised his fist, releasing smoke from his mouth. Timothy prepared for a fight. They were at the same level now. The boy shouted that he was no longer as weak as he had been the first time they met. The Goblin Lord raised a giant cleaver over his head, but Timothy shouted at him not to think he was easy prey. He gave his opponent a quick sword blow to the ribs. The Goblin Lord screamed in pain, and all his minions who came out from different sides of the tunnel hissed fiercely at Timothy. The guy quickly counted his opponents. There were 10 of them. While the ruler was alive, Timothy didn't want to be distracted by trifles. The boy found Lindsay with his eyes and shouted for her to throw him the knives. The girl threw the knives along with her belt at Timothy. They flew into the air, and in flight the knives came loose from their holsters and began to fly in a chaotic pattern right at Timothy and the surrounding goblins. Lindsay, seeing this, screamed her apology to the guy. She realized too late that she shouldn't have done that, but to her surprise, Timothy calmly replied that she shouldn't worry because everything was absolutely fine. He picked up a pair of knives in midair and stabbed all the goblins around him with lightning speed. He moved with incredible speed, catching the next knives before they hit the ground. Each round of weapons found another victim, and no one but Timothy could track his movements or avoid their defeat. The boy's speed grew to nearly lightning speed. The level 1 goblins could not navigate the space quickly enough to react. Finally, holding 6 daggers between his fingers, Timothy said that his opponents were very unlucky. They should not have interfered with him. Their very desire to help only reduced the damage to their owner. A second later, all 6 knives simultaneously hit every level 1 goblin that was still alive. When only Timothy and the Goblin Lord were left standing, the system notified him that his level had been raised to 45. The Goblin Lord attacked the guy from behind, but now Timothy's level was higher and he was much stronger than the boss. However, the boy's plans were shattered when the Goblin Lord began to actively counterattack, striking blow after blow. He was still stronger. Timothy, barely holding back his opponent's attacks, couldn't understand where such fierce pressure was coming from. The armor warned him that this monster had a bracelet that increased its performance in battle. Timothy was surprised. Usually it wasn't so easy to raise a player's level. That's why, to become even stronger, adventurers equipped themselves with items that increased their attributes. However, until that very moment, he hadn't even considered that monsters could equip themselves with such objects. But there was nothing to do. In this case, Timothy's goal was absolutely clear. He had to destroy the bracelet that made his boss's life easier, and he had to do it before the boss killed him. The guy realized it would not be easy. It seemed he would have to give it his all this time. Having prepared for counterattacks, Timothy decided that he would use all his strength and the power of his armor for this throw. In a moment, the former corpse collector rushed at the Goblin Lord. He tried to cheat a little, but the counterattack failed. The Goblin boss easily predicted the boy's maneuver and threw him into the depths of the cave. But it wasn't over for Timothy. He noticed that he had landed near the goblins he had killed earlier, with his daggers still sticking out of them. A second later, 2 daggers were already in his hands, and he was running at the Goblin Lord again. Halfway through, Timothy threw both daggers toward the goblin boss, distracting him. While the boss deflected the daggers with a supercilious grin, the guy had an interesting idea. Timothy ran as fast as he could toward the Goblin Lord, preparing to jump while targeting the bracelet on the boss's arm. The guy shouted that he had said it from the beginning. His goal was the bracelet. The effect of the object was nullified, and the Goblin Lord could not yet understand what had just happened. The boy noticed that it was the first time the Goblin Lord had seen weakness. Old Timothy stood at the entrance to the dungeon, but now he was many times stronger than before, and now it was the Goblin Lord who should run in terror. Finally, Timothy looked carefully at the giant and said that he could try to escape if he could. While the monster was thinking about what to do, the boy raised his sword to strike. He decided to attack first. The Goblin Lord was able to repel the boy's first attack, and at first it seemed to him that it wouldn't take much effort. But in a moment, Timothy threw the Goblin boss a long way into the cave, causing him to slam into the wall. The guy was not going to give the enemy a break. He asked if the Goblin Lord was scared because it was no surprise. His life was now at stake. With his next blow, Timothy knocked the indescribably huge cleaver out of his opponent's hands. The boy realized that if he defeated the Goblin Lord now, he would be free of his weakness forever. But the main boss of the cave, the Lord of the Goblins, was not going to allow such an easy victory. He raised his fist for another blow. For Timothy, these efforts were insignificant, and he dealt a fatal strike to the monster's neck. That was the end of it. Thanks to this fight with the Goblin Cave boss, the boy would become even stronger from now on, and he thanked the creature for it. A few seconds later, the system notified him of a level increase, and Timothy's level was raised to the 80th. The guy turned toward Lindsay's hiding place and called out to her. The girl cautiously approached Timothy, looking at the corpse of the Goblin Lord. She couldn't believe that the boy had actually defeated him. Finally convinced she was safe, Lindsay said that the boy was now the strongest adventurer in the area. According to the usual ritual, Timothy began to mine treasure from the corpse of the Goblin Lord, cutting off his big fang. The guy had never dared to dream that the day would come when he would obtain such a rare material. Lindsay assured Timothy that he shouldn't worry. She was willing to carry anything he needed, wherever it had to go. Gradually, the corpse collector's bag filled up. The blade of the Goblin Lord and the cursed bone appeared there. Timothy sincerely thanked the girl for her help with the material. No one had ever offered him help like that before. Lindsay replied that he shouldn't worry. She wanted to thank him for saving her life, and this was an easy thing to do. The only thing that worried her now was what they would do with the body of the Goblin Lord. Timothy realized that he had already gathered good materials and no longer needed to hide. He could just return to the village. But if they left the goblins alive in this cave, they would be able to kidnap girls from the village again. Something had to be done. The guy asked Lindsay if she would stay with him a little longer. She asked where they were going. The boy replied that he would no longer allow the goblins to kidnap people, especially not his fellow villagers, and that all the monsters in the cave would be destroyed. When the enemies were finally defeated, the boy took the girl back to the village. It was time for them to return home. Timothy was now at the H100th level. Although he had left the village at level 1, he had risen quite a bit in that time. At H100, Timothy would be able to defeat most of the monsters around him. Filled with pride in his achievements, the guy said out loud that he had finally become a real adventurer. Lindsay, who had been walking a little behind him the whole time, asked him what he had just said. The girl ran across his path and shouted into his face that she had never heard of adventurers with a 3-digit level. Lindsay was sure that Timothy could no longer be considered a newcomer, but rather the strongest adventurer in the village. The boy agreed with her statement, although her words made him think. No matter how hard he tried to remember, he was sure he had never seen adventurers with such a high level as his. He could absorb the levels of defeated enemies, so the girl didn't have to worry about him. He had also been surprised when he first discovered that ability. This news only inspired Lindsay even more, and it turned out Timothy would be able to become even stronger thanks to it. Smiling with all her heart and clutching her hands to her chest, she said she would keep her fists crossed for him. Their sweet conversation was interrupted by a group of adventurers. The leader addressed the corpse collector. The guy's name was Michael. He was curious how Timothy got such armor. Was it because the corpse collector couldn't raise his level that he decided to rely on equipment? To Michael, Timothy would always be garbage even if he put on nice gear and armor. Michael said the guy would remain a first-level weakling and no equipment would help him bridge such a difference in levels. At his mockery, the head of the adventurer squad let his guard down and Timothy immediately took advantage of it. Threatening the boy with a dagger, Timothy said he was fed up and told him to shut up immediately. This unexpected turn of events took Michael by surprise. His first thought was to run away, which he successfully did. But it turned out to be a deceptive move, and in the next moment the head of the adventure, the squad, shouting that Timothy should not dare to be confused, ran to attack, but their attempt was a failure within seconds. Michael was on the ground, unarmed, not understanding how it had happened. The members of his group were also surprised by what they saw and didn't know whether they should stand up for their leader. Seeing their hesitation, Timothy asked if they wanted to be next and try fighting him. Michael, sitting on the ground, looked at his hands, unable to understand how he could lose to a first-level player. Timothy laughed in response, saying that Michael, with his level 20, was several times weaker than him. Hearing this, Michael's team members began checking Timothy's level and were stunned by what they saw. Michael joined them and suddenly fell silent when he saw Hale 100 next to Timothy's name. It had to be a joke if it was real. He couldn't even imagine what kind of monster he had just confronted. Timothy noted that at first he was just a corpse collector to his opponents, but now he was the monster. In truth, he was still just an ordinary adventurer. While explaining this, he suddenly realized no one was standing near him. Looking around, he saw a trio of adventurers running away down one of the alleys. The Zemlins, who came up to Timothy, noticed how much he had really changed. People were now running from him. The girl was very happy for her savior, but they had to leave, so she called out to him. She was sure she had to tell everyone in the village about his new abilities. Sometime later, the boy and girl entered a familiar store. The shop owner looked at the boy unfriendly and said he was listening, though not expecting anything special. Timothy, not paying attention to the man's reaction, said that he wanted to sell some materials. The vendor scoffed, saying the corpse collector shouldn't waste his time. He probably brought in some garbage again. Timothy simply smiled and silently took out some of his treasures. After placing them on the counter, he asked if it was still garbage. The amazed shopkeeper couldn't believe what he was seeing. The corpse collector was holding the large fang of the Goblin Lord. The man snatched it from Timothy's hands and examined it closely, asking where he could find such a rare object. Timothy paused for a moment and calmly announced that he had defeated the Goblin Lord on his own. As expected, the shopkeeper didn't believe him. It was too unbelievable for the old Timothy to do something like that. To confirm his story, the boy asked Lindsay to explain what happened. The girl backed up his claim without hesitation. Without waiting for the clerk's reaction, Timothy poured the rest of his treasures onto the counter. Realizing the man was frozen in place, Timothy asked if he would buy the items or if he should go somewhere else. If necessary, he could easily find another buyer for such rare treasures. The seller finally came to his senses and said that he would buy it all. He couldn't refuse such rare materials. Timothy could only hope the store owner would appreciate their value. Sometime later, the boy and girl went to the market to buy supplies. They were both hungry. Timothy showed a bag of gold to an old man he knew, and the man was overjoyed at his success. His grandfather asked where the boy had suddenly gotten so much money. It was incredible. Timothy happily replied that he had finally managed to defeat a powerful monster, and this was his reward for all his hard work. After hearing the explanation, his grandfather sincerely congratulated him on his achievement. But a second later, something happened that Timothy never expected. His grandfather ran up to him and hugged him tightly. At that moment, Timothy felt like the happiest person on the planet. He was truly supported. Then he noticed something happening at the exit of the market. He asked his grandfather and Lindsay to wait at the counter, and it turned out to be a good decision. Werewolves had broken into the village, and all the residents were in danger. One of the monsters had already seen its first target. A girl was trying to run away as fast as she could. Timothy arrived just in time to help her and delivered a fatal blow to the monster, saving the girl. When it was over, he looked back at the girl lying on the ground and asked if she was okay. She responded positively, and he calmed down. Looking at the remaining werewolves, Timothy asked what they were, but he didn't really expect an answer. It didn't matter. They shouldn't have come to the village today. The first few werewolves were followed by a whole pack that climbed over the fence. They lined up in front of Timothy, preparing to attack. The boy realized he couldn't let them into the village. Meanwhile, the locals began searching for Michael and his group of adventurers, but Timothy realized they had fled. They had abandoned their duties because of him, so saving the village was now entirely his responsibility. He didn't mind, especially since the werewolves rushed into the attack. Each of them was level 8, and they posed no real threat to him. Of course, one person couldn't stop the whole gang, so some of them slipped past him and ran straight into the village to attack the townspeople. Hearing their screams, Timothy saw there were too many of them on the street, and Timothy knew he should never forget about them. If nothing was done about this invasion, the werewolves would simply kill all the locals. When one of the werewolves rushed at another victim, Timothy repelled the attack and punched the predator in the nose. He beat the werewolf until it stopped moving, and in the end, there was one less enemy. When it was all over, Timothy asked the man who had almost died if he was okay, and the man replied that he was not injured. When the man remarked that Timothy was a corpse collector, Timothy simply replied that he had more important things to do now. Although the locals considered him just a corpse collector and called him names, he still had clear moral principles. He couldn't leave people to die, so he needed to finish off the huge pack of monsters as soon as possible. The guy moved at high speed past local people who couldn't understand where he got his strength from. One by one he defeated the werewolves who had nothing to oppose the man with the H100th level. With each kill, the guy's level increased. He was absorbing them. Eventually his level rose to 72 in a very short time. Timothy had reached level 72 after defeating most of the monsters, but the werewolves were originally 10. If he had defeated all of them, he would have reached level 80. So everything suggested that Timothy had missed one, and now that Werewolf was among the people in the village, the boy was right. One of the werewolves was sitting on the roof of a house watching a girl standing alone in the street. You might say Timothy found the victim just in time and got to her before the werewolf could land on the ground. The guy was well aware that even with his high-level abilities and experience, he would not be physically able to save everyone. Meanwhile, the werewolf was getting closer to his victim, who stood frozen in place, unable to move. The boy realized he couldn't accept what was happening. He had to save the girl. Maybe he could throw his sword at the beast. The guy had only one chance, but it was better to take the risk than to regret it later. So without hesitation, he threw his weapon in the direction of the monster. The sword flew in a straight trajectory toward its target, with only seconds left before impact. A strong blow from the sword sent the werewolf flying into the nearest wall of the house. It was wounded in the chest. Timothy approached the girl, who was sitting with her arms wrapped around her head. She was terrified. When the girl realized she was no longer in danger, she looked up at the guy and, surprised, called him a corpse collector. She asked if he had really come to rescue them. Timothy was glad the girl was okay. The guy realized he didn't have time to talk, so he hurried to say goodbye, glad that he had managed to save the child. But before Timothy could get far, he was surrounded by locals, and he thought that nothing good was in store for him. One of the locals said that they all had a conversation to have with the corpse collector. The guy understood that this was to be expected. People would be unhappy that they had been saved by a corpse collector. He didn't want to listen to more insults at his expense and hurried to say goodbye, saying they probably wouldn't want to see his face again. But before he could leave, he was stopped once more. Only this time, people wanted to thank him for their salvation. It was thanks to his protection that no one in the village was injured. Timothy had risked his life to save them. After these words, the mother of the girl he had rescued approached him, and he didn't know how to react to this behavior. The woman asked him to listen carefully to her words and thanked him for saving her child, bowing low to the ground. Timothy, seeing this, rushed to the woman and told her to raise her head immediately. He just wanted to help people. That's all. He used to collect loot from corpses, and that would never change. However, now Timothy had the strength to help others. He proclaimed that from now on he would become an adventurer who would help people in need. He asked the locals to watch him, for which he would be immensely grateful. Then he turned around and walked away. On that day, he went from a miserable corpse collector to an adventurer who saved the village from destruction. But the next day came. Lindsay ran after the boy with all her might, calling his name. He didn't hear her right away because he was absorbed in his thoughts. When Timothy looked around, the girl stopped in shock. She asked where his armor was. The guy laughed and asked if she meant his armor of the abyss. If so, he had been wearing it that morning. He suddenly realized that he could put it on and take it off whenever he wanted. Thanks to this armor, the guy was finally able to become a real adventurer. He was happy about what he had found in that strange cave, but the boy was still tormented by thoughts. Why was there a strange dragon corpse in the goblin's cave? Although it didn't really matter now, in the end everything had turned out for the best. Meanwhile, in the goblin furnace, not far from the dragon's corpse, something was happening. Michael and his friends were trying to get away from the enemy who was chasing them. The boy and girl were struggling to keep up with their leader, tears in their eyes, begging Michael for help. Michael didn't understand what such a monster was doing in these caves. He was trying to escape the pursuit, but no matter how hard he tried, it was all in vain. The monster was already in front of him, and the guy sat down on the ground, realizing that his time had come. Far away from the goblin's cave, Timothy still felt something strange. Before that, a group of adventurers led by Michael had chased a Cyclops around the village, and they had wounded it badly. Michael was a little angry. He didn't like that the monster had been able to escape. They had almost finished it off. The boy told his friends to run faster because the Cyclops had already reached the entrance to one of the caves. When the monster disappeared inside, the trio stopped at the entrance, watching it try to hide in the tunnels. Michael realized that because they were not present when the village was attacked by werewolves, the group was fined a large sum of money. That's why they couldn't lose their prey. The Cyclops had to be killed as soon as possible. While they were talking at the entrance, the Cyclops was attracted by the smell of the dead dragon and began to devour its meat. The trio of adventurers followed the monster determinedly. In the heat of the chase, they didn't even bother to conduct reconnaissance. As the two boys and the girl moved through the tunnels, the unpleasant stench of death grew stronger. Someone must have died in this cave recently. When the adventurers reached the chamber, they were amazed by what they saw. One monster was eating another. The Cyclops was greedily devouring the corpse of a giant dragon. Looking at this, the members of the squad were sure something was wrong. Meanwhile, Timothy stood in the forest, trying to immerse himself in his feelings once again. He realized that this wasn't just a strange feeling, someone incredibly unusual was nearby. His feet led him to the goblin's cave. It seemed like he had some kind of connection with this place, just like all the people who were drawn here. Timothy followed the smell, which grew stronger with each step. The dragon's corpse was ahead, but what he saw made him shudder. A huge Cyclops was holding a dead man. In one sharp movement, the monster threw the adventurer's body away and it hit the ground with a splash of blood around it. After the Cyclops had finished off the last member of Michael's team, its eye found Timothy's silhouette in the darkness of the cave. The guy looked at the monster. He had never met such a demon before, but he was confident in his abilities. He was not in danger. Timothy decided to attack first, to be ahead of the curve before the Cyclops had time to make its move. But unexpectedly, the system stopped him, warning that the difference in levels was too great. Timothy was advised to avoid fighting. The guy was so shocked that he didn't notice the monster running up to him and striking him. For the first time, Timothy choked on the pressure. He lost his balance and flew into the depths of the cave. The system informed him that it was recommended to check the status of the enemy, and Timothy could not believe his eyes. This gigantic Cyclops of the Abyss turned out to be at level 200, which was extremely surprising. The guy still hadn't decided what to do. The system reported a powerful energy accumulation in the area of the enemy's head. Still lying on the ground, Timothy was advised to retreat immediately, but he didn't have the strength to do so. The Cyclops began to approach, ready to make him its next victim. The system kept screaming for an immediate retreat. Timothy tried to force himself to get up. He realized that if he didn't act now, his end would come right there. The system reported that there were 8 seconds left before the attack. The countdown continued. As Timothy leaned on his sword, the second the countdown ended, the Cyclops threw the boy away from it, emitting a powerful beam of energy from its eye. Timothy, unable to counteract the powerful opponent, screamed loudly from the blow and was badly injured. He fell to the ground, deep in the furnace. The corpse collector felt like he was losing consciousness, but the Cyclops was not going to stop. The guy didn't know how much time had passed, but something had definitely changed. The system reported that the enemy had left the cave. The monster may have mistaken Timothy for a dead man, but it was wrong, though it was close to the truth. The armor informed Timothy that he was seriously injured and recommended using a potion to heal his wounds. Timothy was delighted. He had completely forgotten that he had found such a potion in the goblin's lair. After drinking 1 bottle of the potion, the boy felt he could at least move more easily. He silently thanked the goblins for their medicine. The boy looked toward the exit of the cave. He had to urgently catch up with the Cyclops. It was definitely heading for the village. Timothy began moving toward the exit when suddenly someone called out to him, calling him Corpse Collector. It was a voice he was very familiar with. Looking around and peering into the darkness of the cave, he saw Michael near one of the walls. The boy was still alive, overcoming incredible pain. Michael said he saw the healing potion and demanded that Timothy give it to him. The leader of the adventurers still believed the potion was too valuable for someone like Timothy. Michael hoped to heal his wounds and escape before the monster reached the village. That's why he began to shout, demanding that Timothy hand over the healing potion immediately. But his enthusiasm quickly faded as he choked on a bloody cough. He began to beg Timothy, saying the pain was unbearable. The corpse collector asked the system that controlled his armor if healing potions could heal Michael's wounds. The system replied that it was impossible. Michael had too many fatal wounds and had 0 chance of survival. According to the calculations, he would die in a few minutes from blood loss. This news was, of course, very upsetting for Timothy, but he was also curious, would the level absorbance skill work on people? The system answered in the affirmative. The guy turned to Michael, saying that he could no longer help him. Michael replied that he had already figured as much. Michael cursed, wanting the pain to finally end. Maybe that was asking too much. Timothy offered him one option. He could put him out of his misery immediately. Michael replied that he wasn't stupid. He understood everything, so he asked Timothy to do it. With the last of his strength, he looked up at the corpse collector and told him to kill him. Timothy admitted that, to be honest, he had hated Michael all along. However, at that second, the guy realized that he would miss him, so he fulfilled the request and reached level 200. Meanwhile, the Cyclops had already reached the edge of the village, watching the inhabitants through the branches of the trees. The monster could feel the accumulation of energy that had drawn it there. It couldn't contain its roar of joy and delight. The victims had been found. But the monster didn't take into account that it had left one witness alive, Timothy, who suddenly ran up behind the Cyclops and struck it in the nose. The Cyclops growled in pain. One of its arms was wounded, and blood was spraying in all directions. The boy shouted that the monster should forgive him, but it would die by his hand. Timothy rushed to attack again. The former corpse collector, now at level 200, declared that the Cyclops should have finished off its enemies. It was precisely because the one-eyed monster hadn't done so that they were now at the same level. The guy couldn't wait any longer. He wanted to deal with the monster as soon as possible before it could kill the villagers. Finally, he added that he had to kill his friend with this hand, so now he was out of his mind with rage. To be asked twice was too much. The monster rushed to attack at the same second, angry at the impudence of a boy. The guy took advantage of his opponent's blind rage and jumped on his shoulder, trying to deceive his vigilance. Once behind the monster, the boy immediately struck it. However, the effect of the attack was weaker than Timothy had expected. The Cyclops' wings were stronger than they had seemed at first glance. The Cyclops began to generate energy again to strike, but Timothy couldn't give it a chance to relaunch. The boy realized too late that the energy accumulation was only for the purpose of inflicting a physical blow, and the Cyclops kicked him without giving him a chance to recover. Then, the Cyclops uprooted one of the nearby trees and swung it at the boy. The blow was so strong that Timothy fell to the ground and broke several tree branches in his path. Timothy collapsed, exhausted. He could barely catch his breath. His injuries were significant, but he was not stubborn. The lives of innocents were at stake. Even though they were now equal in level, for some reason the Cyclops still felt stronger. The boy took out another bottle of healing potion and drank it. The monster even tried to use a trick against him. After the potion, his condition improved significantly. Wiping his lips, he said, "It's not over yet." The Cyclops started generating power again, and the system reported that Timothy was advised to retreat immediately. He tried to orient himself as quickly as possible, but the Cyclops did not want to calm down. A second later, the guy was already dodging the monster's energy beam, and the corpse collector frantically tried to figure out a way out. There wasn't much choice, and Timothy knew it was better to attack than to constantly avoid his enemy's strikes. The boy flew into the air and hit one of the wings with a lightning strike, the wing the Cyclops had been using to protect its eye. Timothy's cry of pain echoed, but he managed to cut the monster's wing. Although it was a difficult task, this small victory gave him renewed vigor and belief in himself. But what happened next even surprised the boy. The Cyclops pushed off the ground. It turned out the monster didn't want to fight anymore. It had decided to run away. Timothy couldn't stop him. The boy quickly realized that the Cyclops wanted to kill all the locals to restore his monstrous powers. Timothy ran as fast as he could after the monster. He had to get back to the village as soon as possible. It was in danger. The locals, meanwhile, had no idea what was coming until they saw the monster's giant shadow overhead. Luckily, they all managed to run away from the spot where the Cyclops landed, as the impact caused a real explosion. The first thing the Cyclops did after landing was destroy the houses around it. The villagers screamed and scattered in all directions, begging for help. This only attracted the monster's attention, and it began using its energy beam against the people and everything nearby. Timothy could not stand such vandalism. He struck the Cyclops unexpectedly and shouted for it to stop. As the monster prepared to counterattack, the boy disappeared from its field of vision, as if he had vanished into thin air. The monster looked up and saw his opponent in the air, preparing for another strike. A moment later, when Timothy reached his target, the Cyclops easily repelled the attack, a smile on its face. Timothy wasn't going to stop. He kept hitting the Cyclops over and over again. His goal was to save the village. The Cyclops responded to this restlessness by concentrating energy in its eye area. It wasn't going to die so easily. In the heat of emotion, Timothy almost forgot about his own safety. The monster tried to take advantage of that, but at the last second, Timothy managed to avoid injury. When the enemy saw it had missed, it swung its huge fist to strengthen the attack. This blow was inevitable. It was so powerful that Timothy sank into the ground, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and stones. The Cyclops, meanwhile, turned around and headed for the center of the village, jumping from one roof to another. When the dust and smoke cleared, people saw Timothy lying in the crater. A few seconds later, the guy tried to get up, saying that he had not yet completed his mission. He realized that only he could overcome such a strong demon, so he must never give up. The Cyclops reached the central market and stood in front of an old man, Timothy's grandfather, who was also his food supplier. The monster coldly called him a thug. The grandfather looked around and realized that even if he ran, they would still catch up to him. In that case, there was no point in fleeing. All he could do was buy time for the hero. And the hero didn't take long to appear. A couple of seconds later, Timothy stood in front of the monster's face. The boy looked back at his grandfather and shouted that a scrapper like him could never be a hero. But his grandfather was adamant. He said the boy was truly a hero. Otherwise, why else would he come to his aid? Timothy may have agreed, deep down, but he still didn't know how to defeat such a strong and powerful enemy. The old man was silent and simply replied that it didn't matter that he and the monster were of the same level. Digging through the drawer, the old man told the boy not to keep so many unimportant thoughts in his head. A second later, when he found what he was looking for, he threw a piece of bread in Timothy's direction. The boy automatically grabbed it. Only after he had the piece in his hands did Timothy realize that it was the same bread the corpse collector ate every day. The old man asked if there was anything different now from the days when he was a corpse collector. Timothy said that the bread still tasted terrible, but thanks to his grandfather, he was able to pull himself together. Timothy thanked his grandfather and apologized to the monster for keeping it waiting. They could continue their fight. As soon as he finished his opening remarks, he immediately started running in the direction of the monster. Timothy flew around the Cyclops like a madman, striking it and avoiding counterattacks. At some point, he lost control, and the enemy grabbed his arm. The monster waved it in like a rag, and after spinning the boy hard enough, the Cyclops threw him toward one of the houses on the street. Soon, part of the street turned into a complete ruin, but Timothy was not going to give up. He was the only outpost to protect the people. Despite his best efforts, he could not find the path he needed to take to defeat this monster. Suddenly, Timothy heard a child crying and looked around to see a boy cowering in fear near the wall of the destroyed house. The corpse collector ran up to the boy, trying to protect him from the Cyclops, and shouted at him to run away immediately. The boy said, through his tears, that he was very scared and couldn't move because his legs didn't obey his head. In the end, all of Timothy's persuasion was in vain. The Cyclops' eye had spotted the little boy and had already made him its target. The giant monster immediately jumped up and landed right next to the frightened child, its mouth gaping open. The boy shrank back in fright, expecting to die, but Timothy covered him with his body, shouting that he would not allow this to happen. With all his desperation, the corpse collector resisted the giant fist of the Cyclops, which was trying to push him down with great pressure. Eventually, the monster retreated, and Timothy had a few seconds to catch his breath. He asked the boy to run away as soon as possible. The boy replied that he still couldn't move, and the Cyclops began to generate an energy beam near its head. Timothy, realizing that there wasn't much time left, began to persuade the boy, saying that he was brave and would succeed. Inspired by such warm words, the boy got to his feet and shouted that he would not be afraid from now on. While the child was running away to safety, Timothy prepared for the next round of battle. The system notified him of the energy accumulation and the need to retreat, but Timothy didn't have the strength to do so. It seemed that this time he would not escape. The Cyclops' eye released an energy beam toward the boy. This time, the energy was quite powerful. Timothy's body rammed into the building opposite and smashed it to pieces. After flying through the building, the guy ended up on the neighboring street, still breathing but almost exhausted. Despite the fact that he and the monster had the same level, the difference in strength was too great. The Cyclops was too powerful an opponent. The system notified him that he needed immediate treatment, so Timothy reached into the compartment with the potions. But a second later, Timothy realized that the compartment was empty. There wasn't a single bottle inside. It seemed that the healing potions had been lost during the monster's last attack and there was no hope for salvation. The guy realized that he had to be healed urgently, but gradually his consciousness began to fade. So, the village was destroyed. If he could recover, he could save all these people, and Timothy really wanted someone to help him. His request was heard. The bottle of the potion was already being emptied, providing the desired healing. Timothy gradually opened his eyes and saw a stranger helping him. Seeing that he had regained consciousness, the girl shouted joyfully. Timothy stood up and asked who she was. The stranger introduced herself as Melissa. She said that she was born and raised in the village, so she also wanted to protect it. She was just an ordinary village girl. The Cyclops couldn't wait long. It was destroying everything around it, so Timothy had to get back to the fight as soon as possible. The girl shyly said that she saw the boy fight the monster to protect their village. All the people also wanted to protect this village despite everything that had happened before, and they were very grateful to him for his sacrifice. She got to her feet and offered Timothy her hand, suggesting they get out of here. But the guy said he couldn't do that because he was the only one in the village who could defeat this monster. The guy leaned on his sword, trying to get up. He had to come up with some plan to save the people in his condition. But Melissa replied that if Timothy lost to the Cyclops now, then nothing would save the village. The boy saw the village burning and smoking behind the girl's back. The scale of destruction was overwhelming. Destruction was increasing with each passing second. Melissa believed that because Timothy was the only defender, he needed to avoid meeting the monster for now. He could only resume his duties once his injuries were fully healed. The guy's whole body really hurt. It seemed like he needed to rest a little more before fighting again at full strength. But Timothy and Melissa's plans were not to be, as the Cyclops landed in front of them a few seconds later, ready for a new round. Melissa once again held out her hand to the boy, who had to decide whether to run away or not as soon as possible. This time, the boy wasn't going to argue. He grabbed Melissa's hand and ran as fast as he could away from the monster. The girl ran into an alleyway and Timothy, without stopping, asked her how she knew his name. Rounding another corner, Melissa said that the boy was extremely popular in the village. Timothy asked if this popularity was somehow related to the corpse collector, and the girl said, of course, but there were some nuances. Abruptly stopping and turning to the boy, she smiled and said that she considered him a hero. When the village was attacked by werewolves, she was also present on the street and saw everything with her own eyes. Suddenly, blushing and closing her eyes, Melissa said that this was why she believed in him. The girl believed that Timothy could save the village, and the boy was incredibly inspired by her words. He promised, with respect in his voice, that he would definitely kill this monster and save their village. The conversation between the boy and the girl was interrupted by screams from around the corner. When they looked out, they saw some people dragging villagers to carts in the middle of the small square. There were 2 carts already filled with residents, and only the last girl was left to be dragged away. The leader of the robbers ordered his men to hurry up because soon the monster would reach there. Even if they all openly kidnapped people, no one could stop them now. The leader of the robbers and looters laughed out loud. Their time to make money had finally come. Timothy didn't understand why he had to come across these disgusting creatures who couldn't even be called human during such destruction. These creatures were going to take everything they could carry from civilians. Melissa was also very outraged by the actions of these people. Their actions were absolutely inhuman. Being fascinated by everything that was happening on the square, the guy didn't notice that the girl was no longer with him. He looked around and saw one of the looters, who was quite strong, holding Melissa and threatening to kill her. The giant looter said that if the guy didn't want this girl to get hurt, he should drop his weapon. Timothy could barely restrain himself from killing the attacker on the spot, only stopped by the girl in the stranger's arms. Eventually agreeing to the giant's terms, the 3 came around the corner and showed themselves to the leader of the robbers. The marauder scratched his head thoughtfully, as if he had informed them in advance that they didn't need the men, but in a second, all the attention of the gang members was directed at the girl, who was really very beautiful. One of the looters said that he was quite sure they would be able to sell her for a high price. Timothy asked how these people had the nerve to do such things while the village was in danger. The head of the looters said that he didn't care what happened to the village. They originally came to this village to plunder it, and the invasion of this monster was useful. Suddenly running up to Timothy, the leader of the looters said that he was lucky that they had not killed every single one of them. These words made the guy's blood boil. Were these crushed people really complete bastards? Timothy's reaction did not impress the leader at all. He laughed and asked if he was really an adventurer. Leaning down to the boy's ear, the robber said that he was very sorry he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Even with so much power, the adventurer could do nothing in this situation. The leader of the robbers no longer paid any attention to Timothy. He turned to his men and told them that it was time to get on the road. Looking at Melissa, who was still in the giant's hands, the man ordered him to watch her more closely. The robbers did not want the boy to interfere in their affairs. Timothy just needed a second. As soon as the right opportunity arose, he would save Melissa, and suddenly that moment came. It was Lindsay. The girl was running at the burly man with such speed that she didn't have time to stop in time. When he jumped aside, she tripped over a stone and fell to the ground, still holding the knife in front of her. The burly bandit said that she could never beat him. He was in a different weight class. But Lindsay replied with a smile that she didn't have such a goal. The plan was a little different. She shouted that she was just a decoy, and a second later, Timothy took his chance. The adventurer was moving so fast and had such strength that the robber had no chance. He just flew into the air. The robber dropped Melissa from his hands, and Timothy managed to pick her up in time. The girl flew straight into his arms. The boy told her that everything would be okay now.